On a quiet street in Ohio, where the wind often rattled broken shutters of long-forgotten homes, there stood a house that no one dared enter. Locals called it the Hollow House on Ashwood Lane, a place children whispered about during dares but never stepped inside. One October evening, Emily, a curious college student full of bravado, decided to prove her friends wrong. She pushed open the rusted gate, laughing nervously as she walked up the creaking steps. The house groaned as if alive, its air thick with the smell of damp earth. Her flashlight beam caught strange markings carved into the wood, but she pressed on. In the basement, a locked door stood waiting, old and blackened as though scorched by fire. With a daring smirk, Emily forced it open. A cold rush of air poured out, and before her friends could react, she vanished into the darkness, leaving silence. The police came quickly, flashing lights painting the old house in red and blue, but to them it was nothing more than a runaway case. They found no sign of struggle, no forced entry, just a missing girl and a group of shaken friends stammering about a door that swallowed her. Sarah, Emily's best friend, wasn't convinced. Something was wrong, something no police report could explain. Sneaking back into the house days later, she ventured into the basement, her breath fogging in the damp air. That's when she noticed scratches on the walls, as if fingernails had clawed at the concrete. Strange symbols were etched deep into the wood of the doorframe, symbols she didn't recognize. Dark stains, long dried, painted the edges. Neighbors had whispered for decades about vanishings tied to the house, about screams in the night and shadows moving behind windows. Sarah realized this wasn't a single disappearance. It was a pattern. Determined to find answers, Sarah searched the house room by room, following dust trails and creaks until she reached the attic. It smelled of mold and decay, but something drew her to a stack of boxes hidden beneath tattered sheets. Inside were old VHS tapes, their labels worn off. She carried them home, her hands trembling, and slid the first into a player. The static cleared, and the screen revealed shaky footage of people standing before the same basement door. Some were laughing, some crying, but all shared the same fate. They opened it, and none returned. Her chest tightened as she played another. On the final tape, a girl looked directly into the camera, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Don't let the door close." The screen flickered violently, and then she was gone, pulled into the darkness mid-scream. Sarah dropped the remote, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. Sarah couldn't escape the thought that Emily was trapped beyond that door. Desperate, she contacted a paranormal investigator named Marcus, a man who had studied Cold War-era supernatural experiments. He listened carefully, nodding with grim recognition as she explained. Finally, he said what she feared most. That door isn't just a door. It's a portal. The government built houses like this one during the 1950s, testing dimensional gateways. Most were destroyed, but some remained. He explained how countless volunteers, prisoners, and even unsuspecting citizens have been taken by these experiments, never seen again. The government buried the evidence, but a few cases had slipped through cracks in classified files. Sarah sat in stunned silence, chills racing down her spine. If Marcus was right, Emily was alive, but trapped in another reality. And if Sarah wanted to save her, she'd have to face the same fate. The choice was terrifyingly simple: enter or abandon. The house didn't sleep. Every time Sarah entered, she felt its presence, a heavy silence that pressed against her chest. Then the voices began. At first, it was faint, a whisper in the still air. Emily's voice, begging, "Help me, please." Sarah followed the sound, her hands brushing the walls, and felt vibrations as though someone was pounding from the other side. But the voice changed with each visit. Sometimes it laughed cruelly, repeating her name in distorted echoes. Sometimes it warned her in tones not quite human. "Leave, or you'll stay forever." Shadows stretched unnaturally along the floors, bending with no light source. Sarah began to doubt herself. Was Emily calling for help, or was the house itself twisting her memories? At night, Sarah dreamed of the door opening in her own bedroom, Emily standing there, her eyes hollow, her voice hollow and wrong. The line between real and unreal blurred. As Sarah pieced together more about the house, she stumbled across files hidden in the sheriff's office. Faded photographs, yellowed reports, all tied to Ashwood Lane. They revealed dozens of vanishings over decades, quietly dismissed as runaways, suicides, or accidents. But the sheriff knew the truth. He had been covering it up. Sarah confronted him late one evening. His face, worn and lined with guilt, trembled as he admitted, "We were warned never to touch that house. That door doesn't lead where you think. It takes what it wants, and it never gives back." His eyes darted nervously, as if even speaking of it would draw its attention. Before Sarah could demand more, a chilling draft swept through the room. The sheriff's expression twisted with fear, and in an instant he was gone. The air fell silent, and Sarah realized the house wasn't confined to Ashwood Lane. It could reach anywhere it pleased. The house seemed to pulse with anger, its windows cracking, its walls weeping water that turned red. Storm clouds gathered as if summoned by its hunger, lightning illuminating grotesque shapes pressed against the glass from inside. That night, Sarah stood before the basement door, which swung open slowly as though inviting her in. The darkness stretched endlessly, a void pulling at her soul. She held her breath, clutching Emily's necklace she had found earlier on the floor. Every instinct told her to run, but her love for her best friend outweighed her fear. Marcus begged her not to enter, warning that none had ever returned. Still, Sarah whispered Emily's name and stepped forward. The floorboard screamed, the air grew impossibly cold, and the door slammed shut behind her. All that remained was the echo of her footsteps disappearing into the abyss, swallowed by the void, just as Emily had been. Sarah awoke on cracked pavement beneath a sky that glowed a sickly red. At first glance, it was her hometown, but nothing was alive. The streets were empty, the houses stood hollow, and figures moved silently in the distance, shadows with no faces. Searching frantically, she finally saw Emily. Her friend stood at the end of the street, pale and trembling, but her eyes were wrong, dark pits with no light inside. "You shouldn't have come," Emily whispered, her voice layered with something not human. Sarah tried to run to her, but the ground warped, stretching like a nightmare. She collapsed, clawing at the pavement as Emily drew closer, her smile grotesque. Behind her, walls of the town shimmered, closing in like a cage. Sarah screamed for help, but no one came. The final words etched on a crumbling wall chilled her blood. She opened the wrong door and never came back.